Hi there, Vincent here. Today I want to talk to you about art, artificial intelligence and the Ghost in the Shell anime from 1995. But it takes a moment before we get to that one. Also, I need you to know this video is less about cinema and more a philosophy essay on what it means to be an artist in the age of burgeoning artificial intelligence. So if you're up for that, let's go. Recently, I've been playing with the Stable Diffusion AI, a free and open source image generating artificial intelligence. You type in a text prompt and the AI spits out an image based on what you've written, which feels very futuristic indeed. Almost like you're asking a replicator in the Star Trek universe for tea, Earl Grey hot, and it automatically appears. After having my fun generating a ton of images, I found myself wondering what it all meant. Who is the real artist here? And is what I've generated even art? Is the Stable Diffusion AI just a tool? Or is it the artist? I find that one an easy one to answer. When you let it run without giving it instructions, it generates gibberish. In my mind, that makes it a tool, one you control with your text input. In that sense, I don't think it's any different than a paintbrush or a camera. It requires deliberate human input to make it start pushing pixels around in a sensible way, and it has no sign of having a ghost of its own. However, the idea of who the artist is becomes less clear to me when you start to incorporate a specific artist style in your text prompts. When I ask the AI to generate The Terminator, drawn in the style of Frank Frazetta's black and white images, we get something that is reminiscent of Frazetta's drawing style. And The Terminator, sort of. The same is true if I ask it to generate images of Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love as painted by Edward Hopper. Does this mean they are the artists of the generated images? I don't think so. I'm a strong believer in that everything is a remix. We're all influenced by culture. Whether you're a filmmaker, musician, painter, writer, or other kind of creative. Whatever you're consuming in terms of content is going to be a conscious or subconscious influence on you. I think in this case, I, with my text input, am the artist. With deliberate influences from either Frazetta or Hopper. Just letting Stable Diffusion do the heavy lifting of making the images. Like actually making them is a mere formality. My artistic contribution to this is coming up with the right prompt, adjusting it by rephrasing it until the AI starts generating the type of images I want to see, and finally curating them, choosing the ones I like best and discarding the others. The thing is, and I promise we'll get to Ghost in the Shell soon, I don't feel a sense of ownership over these images. They may have come into existence because I typed something, however, it's the AI that decides what images it pulls influences from. And whoever made the database that the AI trained on controls what images the AI gets to pull from. I have some control over what it comes up with by changing the wording, but not nearly enough to make me want to say, this is my art. Things get a little bit different when you start to combine influences, but I'll get back to that. As a hobby, I enjoy making scenes in 3D. Way back in early 2016, I finished this image. My first big 3D project. An image that is very much inspired by the 1995 Ghost in the Shell. Especially the short interlude colloquially known as the city scene that unfortunately I can't play to you in its original form. For 3.5 minutes we're shown Newport City, where the story of Ghost in the Shell takes place. For me it's one of the most beautiful pieces of cinema ever. A prime example of poetry in motion. And it has been a huge influence on me. Though Newport City is fictional, it's based on Hong Kong of the late 1980s and the early 90s. Ghost in the Shell's art director, Hiromasa Ogura, along with the location scout, visited Hong Kong, taking pictures that served as references for the film. It's undoubtedly part of the reason why this sequence feels so authentic. It has a real-world perspective. The camera is standing in places where you could stand in real life. A thing that the 2017 live-action reboot-remake film by the same name with Scarlett Johansson got so terribly wrong. Among other things, but I'm not going to go into that right now. According to Agora, Tokyo in the early 90s didn't have that many high-rises, while Hong Kong was already filled with streets in the sky. That's my term for skyscrapers, not his. So they went to Hong Kong to learn what such a dense urban place would look and feel like. Now, I suspect there may have been another reason why they chose Hong Kong to model their city on, and that's the artificial elephant in the room in any discussion in the cyberpunk genre. Blade Runner. In Ridley Scott's 1982 masterpiece, the futuristic and dystopian feel of Los Angeles is famously inspired by Hong Kong as well. That brings me back to my 3D render, which is, as I said, clearly inspired by Ghost in the Shell. specifically this cut from the city scene. I took the general idea of that shot, along with its color palette, and combined it with some ideas inspired by the photographic work of Van Ho, a photographer who captured the Hong Kong of the 1950s and 60s with his unique vision, and whose work I very much admire. So after weeks of serious effort and learning many things along the way, I created a new, original work, one I can feel stand on its own legs, as well as serve as an homage to Ghost in the Shell. Most of the signs are recreations from the ones we see on screen. And though you can't read it in the final render, the name tag next to the door here actually says Van Ho, as a tribute to his influence on my art. We'll go back to Ghost in the Shell shortly. The reason I'm talking about my image is that I want to highlight what I think is an important difference between when a human, with artistic intent, makes choices, versus what an AI like Stable Diffusion does, at least currently. I made deliberate choices on what parts of Ghost in the Shell I wanted to copy, and what not. Some of the junk, like the bar stool or the bicycle wheel, I borrowed from other scenes of the city sequence. The windows I modeled from this photo by Van Ho, using the cat to make a reasonable guess as to their size. I originally would have wanted to include the mist from this picture, but my computer at the time couldn't handle that. I did take the perspective and applied it to my own image, and this laundry sign I took from Ash Forbes' tribute to Ghost in the Shell in Hong Kong. Throw it all together, mixing it with my sensibilities as a photographer and my limitations as a beginning 3D artist, and you've got something bespoke, unique to me. And this is an image that I certainly do feel ownership over, and I can proudly say is my art. Back to Ghost in the Shell. The protagonist of the film is Major Motoko Kusanagi. She is a full cyborg, an artificial body with her consciousness in there somewhere. In the film, she comes across multiple instances of her body, the same physical shape living different lives. And when she sees a copy of herself, she looks what I interpret as disturbed, which isn't surprising because in an earlier scene she said the following: "Just as there are many parts needed to make a human, there's a remarkable number of things needed to make an individual what they are. A face to distinguish yourself from others." A face to distinguish yourself from others. In order to be a unique individual, you need to be able to stand out, to be able to be seen and recognized. The same is true for artists and their art. You need to make something that stands out if you want to get noticed. And this is where the Stable Diffusion AI falls flat. Looking at a website with images generated by Stable Diffusion, I am staggered as to how many similar ones there are. There are differences for sure, and there are ones that stand out. But overall, I feel they are more similar than they are different. Not that popular art websites, like for example ArtStation, are exempt from this, but let's stick with Stable Diffusion for now. Part of the problem is the generic prompts, and this is where combining multiple influences that I mentioned earlier comes into play. If you imitate a single piece of art or artist, you'll just end up with a degraded copy of the original. If you combine two or more influences, then what you have before you is neither influence 1 nor something that was known as influence number 2. To hamfist the Ghost in the Shell reference in there for you. Go to 3 or more and you're off to new territories. Sure, it can become a hot mess, but that's your artistic responsibility to make it all fit together. Taking the parts that are meaningful to you and filtering them through your tastes and sensibilities. Through your ghost, if you will. This is exactly what the makers of Ghost in the Shell did. They took Shiro Masamune's manga, gave it a different and subdued tone, making Motoko a more mature and serious character, opposed to the manga where she's a lot more lively and comical. Taking some strong cues from films like Blade Runner and Akira, as well as director Mamoru Oshii's previous films such as Patlamore. The hauntingly beautiful music by Kenji Kawai is heavily influenced by Bulgarian folk singing, in both its style and composition. Something that became popular in the late 80s and early 90s due to the Mysteries of the Bulgarian Voices compilation albums. He mixed it with traditional Japanese drumming and singing bowls, creating a new and unique musical world for this film, which adds a ton of weight in terms of how serious it feels. They took their visit to Hong Kong, mixed it with their experience of a boat ride through the waterways back in Japan, where they passed underneath a bridge, giving them a new perspective on the city. And this shot is undoubtedly inspired by the approach routes of the old Kai Tak airport, when big passenger planes used to pretty much fly through the city of Hong Kong. While AI-generated images can look artistic and beautiful, they lack intent, and they lack personality. To some extent, you can add that through your prompts, or taking what it generates as a starting point and developing it further. But straight out of the box, I feel it lacks something essential: the human touch. For me, art is something that is filtered through the artist's ghost, their taste and preferences, formed by their life experiences, shaped through their skills and tools.